This is the 2021 Kia Niro EV. It's quite a conventional version of an EV and quite a sensible choice if you want to go for a more conservative route down the EV pathway. There's only one slight problem with this one, is that it costs just over $70,000 drive away for this model you see here. Now, is it worth it? Well, let me walk you around the outside, inside, and take it for a drive to find out. My name's Cameron, this is Product Review Cars. Let's get into it. Now, starting on the outside, the Kia Niro EV does not shout that it's an EV. Apart from a few little hints here and there, no one's gonna tell this is an EV at first glance. I can tell you that much. First of all, from the front, you can see that it does have a filled-in tiger nose grille, which is what Kia calls this little indent design that they have here, and also up on the windshield. And also, if you accidentally lean on the car, you'll find that the charge port, which locks with the car, can open from here. You also see some little light blue or turquoise accents, which sort of hint that this is also the EV model. And then on closer inspection, you'll see that these wheels are also a bit more filled in to help with aerodynamics. And also these tires are actually EV specific tires to provide less resistance on the road when you're driving around to get the most amount of range you can get on your car. So then alongside, you're never gonna tell that it's an EV unless you fall and looking for keys and look underneath and go, hey, that's a EV battery pack. But alongside, it really does look like a very normal looking SUV, and no one at first glance is gonna tell that this is an EV when looking along the side. There's only two hints around the back and also one on the front that this is an EV explicitly, and that is the Niro Eco Electric badge that you'll get on the back, and you'll also get your EV sticker on both license plates to let people know that this is an EV. That's it. And now on the inside of the Niro, it doesn't get any more exciting than it does from the outside, which is part of the appeal when you're buying a more discreet EV like this one. Now, starting up the Kia Niro EV, you press the power button, which is like turning on an appliance, and everything will come to life, especially with that little tone that you heard, that little musical tone, which will let you know that the car is on. And then pretty much, that's all you have to do. It's ready to go. There's no need to warm up. There's nothing to do. On that sense, it's all the beauty of owning an EV. Now, talking about the interior layout here, it is very conventional, but it's also quite nice. It's quite easy to use. And if you've been in any Kia products or really any conventional cars, you'll be very comfortable hopping into this rather than having to learn what it's like to live with a central screen like you'd find on a Tesla. Here we have very conventional displays. We have a digital driver's display in front of us, and we also have an infotainment touchscreen to the left. And that's nicely integrated into the dash, not stuck on, feels a bit more premium than other cars that stick that on the dash. Even though I think Tesla still has the best infotainment system in the car industry, this is nicely done here. In front of me, I don't really love how complicated this display is. It's really got a lot going on, and I know it's great for those who love the nitty-gritty of what's happening and what consequence they have for driving their car. So if you put your accelerator down by just a couple of degrees, all of a sudden you'll get all this feedback going, oh, you're in charge mode, you're putting power down, the car's getting fed back its energy. So it is a little bit complicated in the gauge cluster for what I like. I would much prefer just knowing my range and what my battery percentage is. So that's what it tells you there, but there's all this other information that you're getting which you don't necessarily need. Now, the cool bit of information that I like in the screen, because yes, you're getting more info about your EV in the screen, is that you can use the infotainment to search for nearby stations, and you can also check out your range there as well and have a quick glance at your percentage of your battery, which is nice. And then also there's a really cool thing where it will show you a ring of how far your current range will take you on a map, which is fantastic. The map's really easy to use, and it gives you a nice peace of mind, or lets you plan ahead where you should be charging or if you could make it to your destination. So I really, really, really like that. But outside of all that information, everything else is just a bit excessive. There are some additional buttons down here, like you do have a heating mode instead of just AC mode. So that is kind of interesting, and you can also just turn the fan on for the driver. So there's a few little quirks down here that even some petrol-powered cars don't really get. So it's interesting to see that you have a heat mode and also just fan for the driver. I found that quite unusual. But then what's nice is that you're taking advantage that this is an EV, so you have a lot of storage down below the transmission selector, and also just a little shelf above the USB ports, and also the 12-watt connector, so you can just shove your phone in there when you're using Apple CarPlay. So I like that a lot. The little rotary dial here is quite interesting too. It's very easy to use, but I still prefer the Tesla's stalk system because it's just nice to never have to move your hand. And also this requires you to put your foot on the brake to change it, unlike Tesla where you can just sort of knock it back and forth. So that's just something with this Senate transmission. It's very conventional. So if you like conventional stuff, which I assume you do, if you're liking how this car's looking at the moment, then this shifter doesn't get any more usual. It's just reverse, neutral, and drive, and parks right in the middle. And so you're never going to get confused. And also the engine sound will also let you know if you're in drive or reverse. So if you go into drive, you'll hear like a little hum in the background, and that's how you know you're in drive. And also you can see it on the gauge cluster. And then when you put into park, that sound goes away. So that's really just a quick little audible cue so you don't get confused which transmission mode you're in. There's also drive modes in here. There's plenty more storage below that too, with some pretty cool cup holders which have a nice little design in here. Center glove box is very standard, something you'd see on a petrol car. And then with the steering wheel, I like how it feels. It's got this nice little leather wrap around and stitching, but also there's these paddles on the back. This just has a single gear, so these aren't for changing gears. What they are is for adjusting your regen, which we'll see how that affects driving just a little bit later. And then as for the rest of the cabin, everything's really solid. Everything's really well built in here. That is something that Kia and Hyundai do really well. Is that yes, there are some cheaper materials used occasionally, but really this car, because it costs $70,000, they have to do a good job of trying to justify that. So there's a lot more softer materials in here and stitching and leather than you would find in a conventional Kia product. This also has a JBL sound system, so here's what that sounds like. Pretty crisp, pretty deep, and I do like the sound system in here. It is very good, and it's a lot better when you don't have an engine or transmission working in the background. Now, I do have a bone to pick, and that's with the back seats. And look, the main issue I have back here is that I can't help but feel that Kia hasn't really been able to make this the most ideal EV because it has to fit in a number of different drivetrains. So you've got a plug-in hybrid, you've got a conventional hybrid, and then you've got a full EV version of the Niro. So here, I feel like the compromises start with my leg room. So I'm fine with my knee room. I'm great here, I've got enough knee room, but my feet don't go under this seat. And that's because this floor feels like it's been raised up because the battery pack has to be accommodated underneath. So that means not only can I not put my feet underneath the seat, so I'm left with just using the normal space, which is just fine because I have plenty of space here. Can you see my knees, how they feel, at least they feel like they're right against my chest. You can see the gap down here, and that's because obviously the battery pack's up higher, so then your knees and your feet are gonna be resting higher, and I can't extend my legs underneath the seat. So it is just a bit more uncomfortable in the back seats than it is in the front. And even if I try and recline and get a bit more comfortable, I still do feel like I'm a bit more tucked up in the back seat than I was in, say, the Model 3. And that also goes with the transmission tunnel in the middle seat. So moving over to the middle seat, you're gonna be, yes, squished in a little bit, but at least it's a little bit lower. It's not that pronounced. But the fact that there's a transmission tunnel in here at all just is, it's a little bit lame, and especially if you're gonna be paying more than what a base Model 3 costs. So look, the back seats are okay, but for long trips as an adult, even as 5'11", I've got plenty of headroom. That's not an issue, and the knee room's is not the issue, but it's just my ability to feel comfortable back here. I got the space, but I don't really have the ergonomics to be able to relax back here. There is a center armrest here to help with making me feel a bit more comfortable, but there's a bit of some gloss black plastic here, which yes, looks good, but doesn't necessarily feel nice to sort of recline on either. So look, back seats are probably going to be more suited for shorter trips, to be honest, even though this is an SUV. It's just because this battery pack is impeding quite a lot on my comfort here in the back. Now, luckily, the battery pack sort of ends here, so the boot space is actually all right. Now, when you pay $70,000 for an electric SUV like this one, you're not even getting an automatic boot. It's a manual operation, and yes, I know some people will go, are you that lazy? Well, unfortunately, there are some expectations and also some competitors which would lead you to believe that you should be getting an automatic boot. But we'll leave that aside. At least the battery pack finishes underneath the rear seats, because that leaves you with 451 liters of cargo space in here. So it's nice and deep, you do have a bit more depth to it, and then you've also got a nice bit of height because this is an SUV. What you don't really have, because this is of a shorter wheelbase, is that you don't really have the depth. So there is a cute little cargo cover here, but but it's kind of funny because it's only so long, it's not very big. So you don't really have a deep cargo area, but it will fit at least like 2, maybe 3 suitcases back here just fine. And then underneath the boot floor, you'll find your charger, which is great. And that means that you can keep it somewhere out of sight, and that means wherever you go, and you might find a little adapter or a place to charge when you really need to, you can go ahead and use the spare charger in the back if you must. Now you can fold the seats down in a 60-40 split, but it's a little bit tricky to get that done smoothly. However, when you do, and you remove the little cargo divider out of here, you get a lot more space and it becomes very roomy. However, there is a very noticeable boot lip on the entrance and also against the seat. So just a note for when you're dragging through longer items in here. However, at least you do get SUV-like practicality with how boxy this thing is when you want to fold all the seats down. Now, as exciting as boot space is, let's see how this thing drives. Okay, so let's get started, shall we? Gotta love the music. So when you're sitting here in the car is on as soon as you hit the start button. There's no releasing of the handbrake, there's nothing like that. All you do is just sit here and you're good to go. Now, we do have a couple of different drive modes we're gonna go through, but more importantly, we're gonna hit this sucker and drive, and now we're gonna get a humming sound. So that's an EU regulation. It's also for safety as well of pedestrians, because it's not just on the inside, but it's also on the outside too. And that goes for about up to 20 kilometers an hour, 25 kilometers an hour, and then it will turn off because you're not traveling at a speed where a pedestrian might cross out in front of you anymore. I mean, at least something that could be prevented if you were going at a slow speed, they don't notice you. So that's what that humming noise is. It is a little bit annoying, I've got to say that, but it's kind of cool because it feels like I'm in Back to the Future, and I feel like this is what all cars should sound like in the year 2021 if we were thinking about what cars would sound like back in the 80s. So I think this is kind of neat to have this sound. So the car will start off in eco mode, and pretty much it's as simple as once you knock it in drive, away you go. So it's really simple and easy to use. It's not daunting, it's not like a different car. You'll just hear that noise pretty much when you take off, and that's about it. The dimensions of this car are nice and tight because it's a small SUV, so it's really easy just to get used to this and drive it around. It's nice and small without having to be too wide and low like some other EVs, so it just means that you can feel more comfortable driving this around town. Now, this is a really easy and comfortable car to live with, and look, apart from the drivetrain issues with having the front wheel drive, there's just something that is part of an early adopter's EV at this point, which I've heard is being sought after and fixed when you go and buy, say, the new Ioniq 5 or hopefully the new Kia EV6. It's actually quite good in here. The only thing that I have an issue with is charging. So it's not as convenient as buying a Tesla and going to a Tesla supercharger. And so that means we have to find a third-party charger like this one. And this one doesn't even show up on Kia's own navigation. I would have had to drive an extra 3 kilometers to get to the one that Kia suggested if I had not known this one had been here. And so that requires you to make sure you're pulled up in the right position, you found the right car park, and you also got to make sure no one's parked here in the first place, which isn't guaranteed because someone may have gone off to do some shopping while you're stuck here with 0% charge. And so how do we charge this thing? You pop open the charging port. You've got a couple of different plugs here because there's a couple of different versions you can use. This one is a 50 kilowatt DC charger, so we pick it up and then you plug it in. You've got to make sure all these charging bits and pieces are out of the way. You'll hear a click. Now we've got to go and download this app. So I've got to make sure I have enough money on my card. I've got to make sure I've got the right app. Got to make sure I have signal to download the app here. And so I'll just download the station ID, and then it says, cool, the connector's available. I'll pick that one, and it cost me about 40 cents per kilowatt hour of energy consumed, which is actually pretty reasonable and far better than going to the petrol station. So yes, I'll begin the charge on that, and I have to agree to what sort of payment option I'm going to use, and then confirm my Apple Pay, and there we go. So now we should be charging. Sweet, so I hit start on here, and now I'm going. So the charger reads that my car's got 83% and should be good to go. So I could go off and do whatever I want now. I could go start editing this video if I needed to. And so as for its other safety features, you do have radar, cruise control, and you have all those little gadgets and gizmos you would expect on a car that costs $70,000. And it is a very safe feeling car. You've got a reversing camera. It's not 360 degrees, unfortunately, but at least you've got a nice clear reversing camera, and you've got some pretty clear mirrors as well. So this is a very easy to drive car, and it does feel nice and safe with a bunch of different monitors on it, like blind spot monitoring. That's just going to make you feel like you're being looked after as well when you're driving an EV like this one. So look, it's great. It even has that self-steering and self-centering function similar to what Tesla has with its autopilot. So if you want to use that, you can sort of set your cruise control and set on your self-steering. And so as we go through a corner like this, the steering wheel will steer for itself. So Tesla's not the only one out there doing that sort of stuff. So if you're looking for an EV and sort of like the idea of autopilot, but not Tesla, you do get something similar. It's not as refined as Tesla's one, but you can get something very similar to that in something like the Kia Niro EV. Now, something I did notice, hear that thump when you go over speed bumps? This is a heavy car, but it also feels very heavy going over speed bumps that really shouldn't be all that bad. Those are pretty aggressive speed bumps, but it's just noticeable in a car like this to see just how quickly that suspension rebounds. It's not exactly super smooth. Now, driving in eco mode, we are trying to conserve most of this 64 kilowatt hour battery pack. And so that's because we are going around and we are in an eco car, so we want to try and start in eco mode because that's what's going to keep you having the most amount of range for the most number of times. Now, the other drive modes here include normal and sport and eco plus. So if you're really wanting to save that battery, you can press and hold the drive mode button here and it will chuck the car into Eco Plus. And what's cool, when you switch to the different drive modes, you'll also notice the range change. So I've got 410 kilometers, we're now 409, and I'm just driving along at Eco Plus. It doesn't really change how the car drives all that much when you're at low speeds. However, when you want to get on it and sort of push your foot down, you're still going to get that instant torque, but you're not going to get that sort of electric buzz, I guess, of having all that instant torque than you would in sport mode. So I don't really see myself driving around in Eco Plus all that much. So I normally actually like driving in normal mode. Sport mode's actually quite good in this car, and we'll explain a little bit later. So it's not exactly a massive battery pack in here, and also we've got drive just to the front wheels. In my opinion, that's not so good, and it's something that some manufacturers are dealing with as they're transitioning their cars from petrol to electric. And it's because obviously petrol engines are all right and cheaper when they go in the front, but not so good when you need to drive the back wheels. It's not as cost effective. However, when you're driving in an electric car and when you're building one, it doesn't matter where the motor goes because it's really easy to change where it is because it's not as complicated or as big and needs a lot of different pipes and cooling as a normal engine would. So you can put that almost anywhere. So to put it up the front makes the most sense because that's where you're just going to throw a normal engine, but it just means you do get a little bit of torque steer and chirping at the front tires, which just isn't all that premium feeling when you want to put some power down. Now, what's cool is you do get that electric little whir when you go to accelerate, so it does feel kind of exciting when you do that for the first couple of times. And then you've only got one gear, so you're just very similar to like the Tesla. You're just going to roll around and not ever having to feel a gear change, which is really nice. And I do find myself feeling more relaxed driving this than I do in any other petrol car. It's just a matter of fact with electric cars, so they just feel a little bit more relaxed, and just obviously having that power instantly at your fingertips, it feels a lot faster and a lot more capable than an equivalently powered petrol engine might. And so you can sort of push on it and you're nice and flat and you can go through. So it is a very fun car to drive if you want to push it, which is kind of cool. And then using these paddles, you can activate up to 3 modes of regen. Depending on which drive mode you're in, you'll automatically get a certain amount of regen. But if you pull it all the way to, say, level 3, you can sort of do one pedal driving, which is kind of cool. And it means obviously when you go down a hill, you're going to be feeding the battery a lot more than just using the brakes. And the best part is you can normally make your brake pads last a lot longer or never really have to use them when you're driving in a regen mode. So I really like that when I'm driving around in the Kia Niro. However, there's a slight problem to this regen system. It is not exactly super refined. In level 2, it's pretty good, and in level 1, it's hardly noticeable. But my main issue is that the passengers are going to feel more sick. Anyone, even who's not really susceptible to feeling too car sick, if you're constantly on and off the throttle using the regen braking, it's not going to feel so great for people who aren't in control of the car. Because even as the driver, if I lift off on level 2, I can feel the transmission cutting out and just sort of letting the car coast, but it sort of falls onto the resistance a lot sooner than maybe it could be a bit smoother doing that, but it just feels like it's an on-off switch for the regen. So it sort of feels like you're being thrown a little bit forwards when you lift off the accelerator pedal. Now we've got some more exciting bits of road here, so I'm going to put this car into sport, and that will just make the car flow a bit better when you lift off the accelerator pedal and also make it far more responsive. So it is quite fun in sport mode, and you can spook a couple of people off the line even in more powerful cars just because you've got all that torque instantly available at 0 RPM. Unfortunately, unlike the Tesla, this isn't very good at launching off the line, and it's because these tires, which are designed to be not as resistant on the road, so they're not going to offer as much grip as you would hope for launching. And then also it's front wheel drive, so you're going to get enough torque steer to keep you busy, and also it's a little bit embarrassing because the wheels do like to chirp quite a lot. So if I come to a stop right about now, I'll go, cool, all right, say I'm at the lights, let's go. It's all right because the traction control kicks in, but you're not going to get that brutal acceleration like you do in, say, the Tesla. And then the issue is that the traction control isn't as refined for the launch, because when you go around a corner and you go, okay, let's put on the power a bit more, you get a little wheel chirp like that. And it's kind of making me feel like a little bit of a hoon, but it's just the wheels aren't designed to be gripping in a sport mode like this. So that is just a little downside if you want to drive this with a bit more, I guess, gusto, because going through a corner, this thing will torque steer like anything else. And for example, I'll go through a corner like this and I can feel the steering wheel kick against me, and it just really doesn't want to go in a corner when you put the power on, or say put it on too aggressively. You sort of have to feather the power on as if this is like a race car, so you've got to be a little bit wary of that. Now look, this is very much an early stage and early adopters product. There are some very exciting EVs about to hit Australian shores coming from both Hyundai and Kia. They are fantastic vehicles like the Ioniq 5, and you've also got the EV6 coming from Kia, and those will really give other manufacturers a run for their money. While this represents a very conventional first step for a lot of new EV buyers. If you don't want to go out and buy Tesla, and you don't really want to wait a few years for those other EVs which are much more improved and feel more purpose-built than this one, then this is going to be sort of your mid-step up to those. Yes, it's a bit more premium inside than some of the cheaper EVs out there, and yes, it does have SUV proportions without having to spend over $100,000, so that's where that sits in the market, and the cost really is just a matter of not being a mainstream product just yet. So that's sort of the early adopter fee when you're going out and spending 70K. However, that is the car's main issue, the fact that this one here costs around $70,000, because that's all anyone's going to ring when they see the badge and they're going to say $70,000, why don't I just buy a Tesla? That is going to be the main argument you're going to hear. However, like I mentioned, if you're not buying into the Tesla route, or you don't really see Tesla as a viable option for you, or you just don't want to spend over $100,000 on an Audi or a BMW electric alternative, then this is your option for something a little bit more upmarket. Yes, there's some cheaper EVs, and I'd highly recommend going testing out those if you're looking to save a bit more money. But I think if you are looking for a good mid-step car and you're happy to spend this sort of cash on an electric vehicle for now, knowing that more exciting stuff is coming in the future, well then this is a very good option for the meantime. Now, thank you so much for watching. Leave a like if you liked it, subscribe if you loved it, and make sure you hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any future reviews coming from me here at Product Review Cars. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.